Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for this wide, and I would like to say complete range of strategies, projects, interventions in reusing the city. I really much appreciated this idea of having both bottom-up strategies, but also up to bottom. I think that the reuse of the city and the renewal of the city needs maybe both of these things, and we could discuss if they could be complementary or maybe if they are totally alternative, of they're fighting one against the other. We know that those kind of bottom-up activities, spontaneous activities, sometimes also creates the space for the renewal, also for the gentrification of the urban cities. I would like, as a respondent, it's the first time that I'm a respondent, so I don't know exactly what to do. But anyway, I'll try to add some points that I think that could be interesting to put on the table. About reuse first, which is generally about the question of reuse, not only in the Mediterranean cities. We generally talk about reuse looking back in the past, because of course reuse is something that is kind of forcing us to look at the past and to try to design the future looking towards the past. And that's, of course, fantastic. I think that architecture is mainly a practice in which generally we have to reuse the past to do new projects and to produce new ideas. But I think that there is also another question that is very important for architects and for designers. Can we design new things thinking about the future use of these things? We have seen how much reuse is important, both in terms of social, ecological issues, how much reuse is something that really can be, from an economical point of view, very, very, very useful and important. So my question is, can we really think about new architecture, something that then could be sooner or later, then reused? Aldo Rossi, in the Architecture of the City, he talked about this fact, about the importance and the beauty of some buildings like the Palazzo della Ragione di Padova, that during history have been reused and transformed several times. And he was arriving to a conclusion in which then architecture has a kind of autonomy for the uses. So the importance of architecture is basically in its typology, in its form, and it's independent from the programs and the function. I would like to maybe on the contrary, to think that the value of architecture maybe could be on the contrary in being able during time to host the different programs. So what I ask myself, also in my personal practice, what does it mean to design architecture that could be reused? For example, if you look at the legacy that we have from the 20th century, for example, in Italy, we have many huge, important public housing building projects that are very hard to be reused because they don't have that kind of looseness that maybe have the former industrial areas that are big. They are very generous in spaces, so they really offer, from a technical point of view, the possibility of being transformed and reused. So can we plan, for example, public housing district that can be, from a structural point of view, from a technical point of view, from a formal point of view, being then reused in the future? So it's much easier to transform a factory in an office than to transform, of course, a housing building in a factory. That's banal. So I think that this is a very important question. Now that in academies, in architecture, the word autonomy of architecture is still coming out, I think that thinking about this, it's a really crucial point. Then, going to the Mediterranean Basin, looking at Greece, but also to Madrid, I was thinking about a trip I made in Lyon during this winter, and I was really asking myself if this capability of the political power to generate this new renewal project of huge part of the city is something that maybe we need to think as something of the good old times when maybe the central state had enough money to generate those kind of processes, because it's clear that the role of the public power is very important as one of the actors. But we know also that this role more and more needs to have the convergence and then the encounter with the private sector. So the question is how to find a balance. I'm just thinking if really the public, how much power will have in the future, and how much the private investors will have more and more an important role in this. But I would like to add another element that have to be reused. And then I think that is maybe more problematic than of some of the examples that we have seen. Great parts of the Mediterranean cities are largely informal, but not informal like maybe Athens is, in which you have this very incredible, intense urban density. We have in Italy, for example, but also in Rome, but in the south of Italy, in the Mediterranean coast, enormous, immense areas of low-rising houses that were built in a totally informal way out of the general plan of the cities, without the proper road infrastructure, without the proper services, gardens, etc. Those kind of cities that an Italian architect and researcher calls the latent cities, because they're not cities, they don't have anything that really qualifies them as cities, because they don't have the density, they don't have the elements, they are monofunctional many times. Are parts of cities that really I wonder how it could be possible to renew, because those parts of the cities are places in which I can't imagine a private investor willing to get higher prices for the rent, because they are too far from the center, because they are sometimes also too poor to be renovated, and there will be I don't know if there will be in the future any real interest in renovating them. But anyway, this is an immense asset that we have in our cities, in the Mediterranean cities, and we have to do something. Generally, in Rome, for example, all these neighborhoods are renovated just with investment of the public power. So I think that this is a problem, and that kind of reuse, we should find a way, a strategy. But it's not only a question of finding an economical, political way of intervening on these areas, but to me, it's also a question of imagining a language for these parts of the cities. Because we're talking about a very poor and derelict architecture with a kind of vernacular language, which is, in comparison, the one of, I think, of the contemporary Athens, it seems like a bright, modernist, common language. We're talking about places in which you can have a very rough concrete structures with just, the bricks in the middle, or, I don't know, quasi similar to alpine villas. So it's really a mix of terrible things. So how can we deal with this thing? Also from the point of view of creating an image of the city. I'm always thinking about the fact that maybe the medieval cities of the historical centers once looked like this. Architects were thinking that maybe it was really terrible buildings, and then after centuries we found those buildings beautiful. So it's really a question, I'm finishing with that, of aesthetics. How can we find aesthetics? There is another important, architects that I really like, Italian architects, whose name is Beniamino Serbino. He works very much on this topic. He called that landscape the landscape of abandonment, and he says in the landscape of abandonment all buildings are equal, and he puts at the same level the Roman aqueduct together with the horrible small single houses not finished, because he says we have really to look at this landscape as something in which all the ruins have to be treated with the same attention to found a new language in which we can find again an idea of layering landscapes, layering architectures and cities. That's it. I hope that our panelists can maybe, tell something about this. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good evening to everybody. Okay, considering the fact that it's the last one, I have to stay in 10 minutes. I try to be synthetic, and of course I need to be a little bit radical. So I do some questions to the speakers, and so I suppose that we could activate the discussion. So I'm very interested in all of these three experiences because they present a sort of new and old ways to activate processes in urban territory and the cities. And because paradoxically, in their being very different, they present one interesting aspect of the Mediterranean that is a complex place. And I noticed that no one speaks about Mediterranean, so everybody speaks only about reuse. Of course, there is city that is Athens or Albania that are in the center of Mediterranean, but there is something that is very funny, like Madrid, that is included in this panel that is not touch the border. So one question is, what is Mediterranean? Where is the boundary of the Mediterranean? Which is the border of the Mediterranean? Of course, the border is the place where the water touch the earth. But then we arrive also talking about project in Trento, where you're presenting a sort of imaginary interesting element to passing through Alps till Mediterranean. And Madrid, of course, in the center of Spain. Probably it's much more nearest than in the ocean than in the Mediterranean water, let me say. So this is an important element to define Mediterranean. If there is a specificity of the reuse in Mediterranean, contrary to the reuse in the other part of Europe, because sometimes also we do an incredible mistake about Mediterranean. We're talking about Mediterranean considering only the north side of Mediterranean, so what is attached to the Europe. And talking about Mediterranean, we're talking about Europe, and never talking about the other side of the Mediterranean. It is a very important place where we find our future, because we are invited by day, finding work here, and in a sort of sense we have to find a way to merge with the other side of the Mediterranean. If you close your eyes one moment and we're talking about and we don't think about, let me say, religious, you have a sort of map of Mediterranean. And if you do the same exercise reflecting in courtyard typology, that is specific architectures, you have another map of Europe. So the question is that Mediterranean is a so complex place that according to a subject change completely the shape, the identity, the border of it. And this one is, could be a value and also a problem, because we are a huge community, and this huge community you have to find a way to be once. Otherwise, we produce a strange effect like you described in Greece, that we have problem with the other side of Europe that is not facing to the Mediterranean side, and probably don't understand some problem that Mediterranean have, according to starting from our culture and our typology and morphology that define our space, the space where we live. So I have very synthetically some question I try to find in my first is concerning the presentation did by Deriva, that is talking about this huge highway. And my question is the highway paid by the municipality? So is a public intervention? Because if is a public intervention, my question is, how many times the government can directly operate to prepare the ground, to prepare the field for a correct and proper practice of reuse? Because of course, if someone solved the problem in my city, in Milan, concerning the fact that I never find a place for my car downstairs, of course I'm very happy and I'm interested to renovate my building, because I know that if someone solve a huge problem that I never been able to solve alone, I could invest and so produce good effect. And I know this one because we are a country where we are specializing to have a huge debt with a high level of richness in the family. So all time we produce our, let me say, practice of development hide by the municipality, hide by the state, by the regional government that pay for us for the main infrastructures, and then we operate doing investment. This one looks like easy, you know what I mean? So the question. And the second question for what you describe about the relationship between bottom-up and top-down, that was very interesting. So I'm very interested in this kind of activities bottom-up. That is a sort of very interesting activity that is also defined in Italy, for example, for a long, long time in the Middle Age, when the corporation and also the church collect from the horizontal level of the information and move to the makers. So I know that this one is a very clear way to produce a short circuit between the bottom part and the top part. But the question is, because you're talking about also the fact that, for example, it was very interesting that your wish is for a new dimension both for society and architects, where the architects become a sort of not promoter, but of course, perfect. So my question is, where is? Sorry, did I find it? I find, wait a moment, I lost. Okay, so now I find. So the question is, it's possible to, so you mean that this kind of way to implement the, okay, is this one, how the practice bottom up, if not guided by a logic of profit, can really affect the transformation of our city, especially where the social cultural fabrics is not yet anymore, not yet mature enough. So my question is, this practice without any control, any relationships or clear relationship between the logic of profit, that is a logic that we know, so there is no one other. So we try to evaluate communism, socialism, but at the end, the unique one that we have nowadays, good or not, is that one. So the logic of profit. So, and then the second question is more interesting. Is you means that that group of people could be in a really way promoter of something that could be usable for everybody, or is not only a perspective of his own needs that sometimes couldn't be interesting for everybody, for the other part of the city, of course. And then the last consideration is about Albania. I went 12 years ago in Albania to do a tour to evaluate some business possibility, of course, some business activities, and I passing by this place, and I couldn't come in because it was completely closed. But then I went to have a dinner with a mayor of nearest villages and municipality, and he showed to me a beautiful advertising about Albania. It was Albania, the last secret of Mediterranean. And so my question is that also Italy and then Greece and then Spain was the last secret of Mediterranean. When the Second World War was finished, many Americans come to discover Portofino, for example. That was a normal fisher villages that became very famous through the new kind of tourism that come in Italy, discovering it. And so the question that I wrote for you is how we can achieve a balance between conservation and development. So there is possible to have conservation without also massive development or not? Thank you. Sorry.